Welcome back to a weekly recap of the 2024 NFL season. This week we will be covering week 4 as we have 16 games to cover today. If you like this type of content, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I appreciate all the support as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So without further ado, let's get straight into this one. Let's get into it. Starting with Thursday night football between two NFC East divisional opponents, the Dallas Cowboys and the New York Giants, in which the Dallas Cowboys defeated the Giants 22-15. The Cowboys are 2-2 and the Giants are 1-3 heading into week 5. Dak Prescott was 22 for 27 with 221 yards and 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb had 7 receptions for 98 yards and a touchdown. Daniel Jones went 29 for 40 with 281 yards and 1 interception, and Malik Nabers, the rookie sensation, had 12 receptions for 115 yards on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Giants field goal on their first drive of the day. The Cowboys answered with a touchdown of their own on the next drive, followed by another New York Giants field goal. We headed into halftime with the Cowboys leading the Giants 14-9. Both teams scored field goals to start off the second half. The Giants scored a field goal early in the fourth quarter to cut the lead down to 2. The score was 17-15, and then Dallas followed up with a field goal of their own on the next drive, and the Cowboys held on to win 22-15. The second game of the week was between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Philadelphia Eagles, in which the Buccaneers beat the Eagles 33-16. Heading into week 5, the Buccaneers are 3-1 and the Eagles are 2-2. Jalen Hurts went 18 for 30 with 158 yards and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 10 carries for 84 yards. And on the other side, Baker Mayfield won 34-47 with 347 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mike Evans had 8 receptions for 94 yards and a touchdown on the day. The Buccaneers opened up the game by scoring the first 21 points over the Eagles. It wasn't until the score was 24-0 that the Eagles scored a touchdown, and heading into halftime, the score was 24-7. To start off the second half, both teams scored a touchdown on their opening drive. At that point, the score was 30-16, and the Eagles did not score any more points after that. This ended with the result of the Buccaneers winning 33-16. The next game of the week was between the Chicago Bears and the Los Angeles Rams, in which the Chicago Bears beat the Rams 24-18. The Bears start off 2-2 heading into week 5, and the Rams are now 1-3. Matthew Stafford went 20 for 29 for 224 yards and an interception. Kyren Williams had 19 carries for 94 yards and a touchdown. Tutu Atwell on the Rams had 4 receptions for 82 yards. Caleb Williams went 17 for 23 with 157 yards and a touchdown, the first one of his NFL career. DeAndre Swift went 16 for 93 with a touchdown, and DeAndre Swift also led receiving as well, as he had 7 receptions for 72 yards. The Rams scored the first 6 points of the game with 2 field goals, and then in the second quarter, the Bears scored a touchdown to make the score 7-6, and heading into halftime, the Chicago Bears led the Rams 10-6. To start off the second half, the Rams got the ball and scored with a field goal, and then there was a series of touchdowns by both teams, with the score being 18-24 at the start of the fourth quarter, and both offenses stalled after those scoring, and we got the final result with the Bears winning 24-18. The next game of the week was a divisional matchup between two AFC West opponents, the reigning Super Bowl champions Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chiefs defeated the Chargers 17-10, as the Chiefs are undefeated heading into week 5. The Chargers fall to 500 at 2-2. Patrick Mahomes went 19 for 29 with 245 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Kareem Hunt, freshly signed, got 14 carries with 69 yards. Travis Kelce got his mojo back as he had 7 receptions for 89 yards, and Xavier Worthy had 3 receptions for 73 yards with a touchdown, a huge touchdown at that. Justin Herbert was in the game nursing a high ankle sprain, but he went 16 for 27 with 179 yards and a touchdown. Ladd McConkey, the rookie out of Georgia, led receiving for the Chargers with 5 receptions and 67 yards and a touchdown. The Chargers offense started off hot with a 10-0 lead over the Chiefs to start off the game. Heading into halftime, the Chiefs responded with a touchdown of their own, with the score being 10-7 at halftime. Early in the third quarter, on the Chiefs' first drive of the second half, they tied the game up at 10 with a field goal. There were some questionable calls by the Chargers to go for it on fourth down with a play that got blown up, and the Chiefs scored a touchdown late in the fourth quarter to give the Chiefs a 17-10 lead, as the Chiefs were able to retain the ball at the end and run out the clock. The next game of the week was between the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets. The Broncos beat the Jets 10-9, with both teams heading into Week 5 with a record of 2-2 and at 500. Bo Nix scored his first touchdown of his NFL career, going 12 for 25 and 60 yards. Javonte Williams went 16 for 77, and Courtland Sutton led the team with 3 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers went 24 for 42 with 225 yards, and Mike Williams led the team with receiving 67 yards on 4 receptions. Both teams were fumbling and punting the ball to start off the game, and it wasn't until the second quarter that the Jets scored the first points of the game with a field goal. At the end of the first half, the Jets notched up another field goal, taking a 6-0 lead heading into halftime. On the second drive of the second half, the Broncos scored a touchdown, followed by a Jets field goal as well as a Broncos field goal. The score was then 10-9, and both teams had to punt, turnover on downs, missed field goals, and ended the game with a final score of 10-9. The next game of the week was between two NFC North divisional rivals between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. The Vikings defeated the Packers 31-29, and the Vikings are starting red hot, taking a undefeated record heading into Week 5. The Packers are now at 500 at 2-2. Sam Darnold continues his hot start, going 20 for 28 with 275 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Aaron Jones, against his former team, had 22 carries for 93 yards. Justin Jefferson led the team in receptions with 85 yards and a touchdown, and Jordan Addison followed second with 3 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown of his own. This was the first game back for Jordan Love from injury, and he went 32 for 54 attempts with 389 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Josh Jacobs went 9 for 51, and Jaden Reed had a breakout game where he had 7 receptions for 139 yards and a touchdown. Dontavian Wicks had 5 receptions for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Tucker Kraft had a touchdown of his own as well. The Vikings opened up the game with a touchdown on their opening drive and scored the first 28 points of the game. It wasn't until the last drive before the end of the first half that Green Bay was able to get on the board with a touchdown. At halftime, the Vikings led 28-7. It wasn't until the fourth quarter that any team were able to score again, and on 2 consecutive drives, the Packers scored 2 touchdowns to make the score 28-22. It was followed up with a field goal by the Vikings on the next drive to make it 31-22. On the final Green Bay drive, they scored a touchdown to make the score close to make it 31-29. However, the Vikings got the onside kick and ran out the clock to win 31-29. The next game of the week was between 2 divisional opponents. of the NFC South, it was the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, in which the Falcons beat the Saints 26-24. Both teams are 2-2 to start off the season. Derek Carr went 28 for 36 with 239 yards and an interception. Alvin Kamara had 19 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown. Taysom Hill had 2 touchdowns on the day, and Chris Olave led the team with receiving as he had 87 yards, and Rashid Shaheed had 83 yards on the day. Kirk Cousins went 21 for 35, had 238 yards on the day with an interception. Tyler Algier had 60 yards, and Drake London led receiving as he had 64 yards on the day. The Falcons scored the first points of the game with a touchdown when they punted the ball, and the Saints returner muffed the ball, and the Falcons took it to the end zone. It was followed up by a touchdown drive by the Saints. Then we had lots of scoring by both teams as the Saints followed up with a touchdown. The Falcons then had a field goal, and then Derek Carr threw a pick six to make the score 17-14 in favor of Atlanta, and that was the scoreline that we had heading into halftime. In the third quarter and the early fourth quarter, these two teams exchanged field goals, with Atlanta having a 23-17 lead early in the fourth quarter. In the late fourth quarter, the Saints scored a touchdown to go above the Falcons 24-23. However, Young Hui Koo scored a game-winning 58-yard field goal, with the final score being 26-24 in favor of the Falcons. The next game of the week was between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Carolina Panthers, in which the Bengals beat the Panthers 34-24. Heading into week 5, both teams are 1-3. Joe Burrow went 22 for 31 with 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Chase Brown led the team in rushing with 15 carries and 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jamar Chase had 3 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. Andy Dalton went 25 for 40 with 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Chuba Hubbard led the Carolina rushing with 18 carries and 104 yards and a touchdown. Deontay Johnson had 83 yards and a touchdown, and Xavier Legette had 66 yards and a touchdown as well. In the second quarter, we had both teams exchanging touchdowns as the Bengals scored first. The Panthers responded. The Bengals scored another one. The Panthers then responded to tie it up at 14. However, before the end of the first half, the Bengals scored another touchdown to take a 21-14 lead over the Panthers heading into halftime. The Bengals got the ball to start off the second half, and on their first drive, they scored a touchdown to make the score 28-14. And late in the third quarter, the Bengals scored a field goal to push their lead up to 31-14. The Panthers then answered with a touchdown of their own and another field goal by the Panthers to make it a one-possession game. The score was then 31-24, and on the last Bengals drive of the game, they scored a field goal to get the final score 34-24. Next game of the week was between two divisional opponents in the AFC South, the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Texans beat the Jaguars 24-20. The Texans are 3-1 to start off the year, and the Texans fall to 0-4. Trevor Lawrence went 18 for 33 with 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tank Bigsby had 7 carries for 90 yards, and Brian Thomas Jr., the rookie, led the team in receiving with 6 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. CJ Stroud went 27 for 40 with 345 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Nico Collins led the team in receiving as he had 12 receptions for 151 yards and a touchdown. The Jaguars put up the first points of the game with a touchdown after the Houston returner muffed the punt. The Texans then went on a drive themselves to tie up the game with a touchdown, in which the Jacksonville Jaguars responded with a field goal on their next drive as they led 10-7. In the second quarter, the Texans then responded with a touchdown of their own as they led 14-10. Then both teams would exchange field goals on the next two drives, and heading into halftime, the Texans led the Jaguars 17-13. In the middle of the third quarter, Jacksonville took the lead when they scored a touchdown as the score was 20-17. It wasn't until the final Texans drive of the game that they scored a touchdown to take the lead 24-20. The next game of the week was between the Indianapolis Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers, in which the Colts beat the Steelers 27-24. The Colts are 2-2 and the Steelers are 3-1 heading into week 5. Justin Fields went 22 for 34 with 312 yards and a touchdown. Justin Fields also led rushing with 10 carries for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. George Pickens led the team with receiving with 7 receptions for 113 yards, and Pat Freiermuth had a touchdown reception in the game. Anthony Richardson got hurt early in the game. He went 3 for 4 for 71 yards, which resulted in Joe Flacco coming into the game as he went 16 for 26 with 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor had 21 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown. Michael Pittman led the team in receiving with 6 receptions and 113 yards. Josh Downs went 82 yards with a touchdown on the day. The Colts scored the first 17 points in the game, and on the last drive of the first half, the Steelers answered with a field goal. The score was 17-3 heading into halftime. It wasn't until late third quarter that any team scored. It was capped off with a Steelers touchdown, followed by a touchdown by the Colts, followed by another touchdown by the Steelers, a field goal by the Colts, and another touchdown by the Steelers. It was a scoring fest between the two teams in the end of the third quarter and most of the fourth quarter. The Steelers scored their final touchdown with 3:40 left in the fourth quarter. They made the Colts go 3 and out and turned the ball over on downs. The Colts held on and won the game 27-24. The next game of the day was between the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals, in which the Commanders beat the Cardinals 42-14. The Commanders are 3-1 to start off the year, and the Cardinals are 1-3. Jaden Daniels went 26 for 30 with 233 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Brian Robinson led the team in rushing with 21 carries for 101 yards and a touchdown. Jeremy Nichols had 2 touchdowns, and Jaden Daniels had a touchdown on the ground as well. Olamide Zaccheaus led the team with receiving as he had 6 receptions for 85 yards, and Terry McLaurin had 7 receptions for 52 yards and a touchdown. Kyler Murray went 16 for 22 for 142 yards and a touchdown. James Conner had 18 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. Maserati Marvin Harrison Jr. led the team in receiving with 5 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. The Cardinals scored the first points of the game with a touchdown on their opening drive, responded by a Commanders touchdown on their opening drive, and on the next Commanders drive they scored another touchdown, and heading into halftime they capped it off with a field goal as the Commanders led 17-7 at halftime. The Commanders scored a touchdown on their opening drive in the second half, followed by another field goal. Then both teams exchanged touchdown, and the Commanders capped it off with a touchdown on their final drive as they won the game 42-14 over the Cardinals. Next game of the week was between the San Francisco 49ers and the New England Patriots. The Niners beat the Patriots 30-13 as the Niners go 2-2. Heading into week 5, the Patriots are now 1-3. Jacoby Brissett went 19 for 32 with 168 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Ramondre Stevenson led the team in rushing with 13 carries and 43 yards. Antonio Gibson led the team with receiving as he had 3 receptions for 67 yards. Brock Purdy went 15 for 27 with 288 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Jordan Mason led the team with rushing with 24 carries, 123 yards, and a touchdown. Jawan Jennings led the team in receiving as he had 3 receptions for 88 yards. George Kittle also had a touchdown. The 49ers scored the first 20 points of the game, and it wasn't until the final drive before halftime that the Patriots got on the board with a field goal. At halftime, the score was 20-3 with the 49ers in the lead. In the first drive for the Patriots in the second half, they scored a touchdown, followed by another 49ers touchdown, which made the score 27-10. It wasn't until the fourth quarter that the Patriots answered with a field goal, and then the 49ers, on their second to last drive of the game, scored a field goal to give us the final score of 30-13. The next game of the week was between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Cleveland Browns. The Raiders beat the Browns 20-16 as the Browns are 1-3. The Raiders are 2-2 heading into week 5. Deshaun Watson went 24 for 32 with a touchdown and interception. Jerome Ford led the team with rushing with 10 carries for 58 yards. Jerry Jeudy led the team with receiving with 6 receptions with 72 yards. Gardner Minshew went 14 for 24 with 130 yards. Alexander Mattison had 60 yards. Zamir White had 50 yards on the ground. Jacoby Myers had 49 yards, and Trey Tucker had 41 yards, as they were the leading rushers and receivers for the Raiders this game. The Browns scored the first 10 points of the game. The Raiders answered with a touchdown early in the second quarter, and with a field goal, we were all tied up at 10 apiece heading into halftime. The Raiders then scored the next 10 points, having a 20-10 lead over the Browns. Rodney McLeod then had a fumble return touchdown for the Browns, in which it made the score 16-20, and then both teams had a punt fest, and then on the final Cleveland Browns drive, they had turnover on downs to give us the final score of 20-16. The Sunday night football matchup this week was between the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills, in which the Baltimore Ravens defeated the Bills 35-10. The Ravens are now 2-2. The Bills are now 3-1 heading into week 5. Josh Allen went 16 for 29 with 180 yards. Khalil Shakir led the Bills with 62 yards. Keon Coleman was second with 51 yards, and Dalton Kincaid was third with 47. Lamar Jackson went 13 for 18 with 156 yards and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 24 carries for 199 yards and a touchdown. Derrick Henry took it to the house on the first play of the Baltimore Ravens offense this game, as he had a 87-yard touchdown run. Heading into halftime, the Ravens were beating the Bills 21-3. The Bills answered with a touchdown on their first drive in the second half. The Ravens then scored 2 touchdowns in the late third quarter and in the early fourth quarter to take a 35-10 lead, and all the teams were punting the ball left and right towards the end of the game, as we ended the game with a 35-10 score. Here is the first of 2 Monday Night Football games to cap off the week. The Tennessee Titans took on the Miami Dolphins, in which the Titans beat the Dolphins 31-12. Mason Rudolph took over for Will Levis after he got hurt early on in the game. He went 9 for 17 with 85 yards. Tony Pollard had 88 yards and a touchdown. Tyjae Spears had 39 yards rushing with a touchdown of his own. Both DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd led the team in receiving with 31 yards apiece. Tyler Huntley started for the Dolphins as he went 14 for 22 with 96 yards. The entire Dolphins offense struggled as both teams were exchanging field goals in the first half. Heading into halftime, the Titans led the Dolphins 9-3. It wasn't until the second drive in the second half that the Dolphins answered with a field goal to make the score 9-6. The Titans then answered with a touchdown of their own and a field goal on their next drive, giving them a 19-6 lead. The Titans then scored another field goal to make it 22-6, and then the Dolphins finally responded with a touchdown of their own to make it 20-12. The Titans then scored a safety to make it 24-12, capped off with a touchdown at the end of the drive, which would give us our final score of 31-12. The final game of the week was the second Monday Night Football game between the Seattle Seahawks and the Detroit Lions, in which the Detroit Lions beat the Seahawks 42-29. Both teams are 3-1 heading into Week 5. Geno Smith went 38 for 56 with 395 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Kenneth Walker led the team in rushing with 80 yards and 3 touchdowns. DK Metcalf had 7 receptions for 104 yards. Jared Goff went 18 for 18, had 292 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Amon-Ra St. Brown went 1 for 1 with a touchdown, with Jared Goff getting his first touchdown catch of his career, maybe his entire life. Jahmyr Gibbs had 78 yards with 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery had 40 yards with a touchdown. Jameson Williams led the team with 80 yards receiving and a touchdown. Both teams scored touchdowns in the second quarter, and heading into halftime, the Detroit Lions led the Seahawks 21-7. To start off the second half, we had both teams exchanging touchdowns in a shootout, as the Seattle Seahawks scored 3 touchdowns in their first 3 opening drives. In the second half, the Lions scored 2 touchdowns in their first 2 opening drives as well. This made the game a 1-possession game, as the Detroit Lions led the Seattle Seahawks 35-27. The Lions then sealed the game as they scored a touchdown in the middle part of the fourth quarter to make the score 42-27. However, the Seahawks made it interesting as they scored a safety on Jared Goff on the Lions to make it 29-42 with about 3 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. However, on the fourth play of the drive, Geno Smith threw an interception, and that sealed the game as the Lions won 42-29. That recaps all 16 games of Week 4 here in 2024. Let me know in the comments below, who do you guys think will win their matchups in Week 5? If you like this type of content, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I appreciate all the support as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. If you're a fan of the NFL and college football, stay tuned, as we'll be covering both all season long. Appreciate all the support, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.